Have you ever been lying in bed at 2 a.m., replaying a minor conversation from 3 years ago, completely agonizing over a joke that didn't land? You're staring at the ceiling, wondering why your brain decided that this of all things was the data point worth a high-definition midnight screening, while you simultaneously can't remember where you put your car keys 10 minutes ago. If you find yourself in this loop, society has probably already handed you a very specific set of labels. They've told you that you're too sensitive, that you're a master of none because you have 14 half-finished projects in your garage. And they've asked with that subtle, patronizing tilt of the head, why can't you just focus? We've been raised on a diet of industrial-age productivity advice that treats the human brain like a standardized assembly line. And when your gears don't turn in a straight line, the world tells you the hardware is defective. You start to look at the aging brain narrative and fear that your forgetfulness or your inability to pick a lane is just the beginning of a slow cognitive decay. But as someone who spends their life decoding the messy, brilliant architecture of the mind, I am here to tell you that the diagnosis you've been given your entire life is fundamentally wrong. You are not broken, you are not lazy, and you are certainly not past your prime. You're simply running a high-definition, high-fidelity operating system in a world that was built for low-resolution cogs. It is time to stop looking at your perceived weaknesses as bugs and start seeing them as the features of an M-shaped thinker.
Ow.
You aren't unfocused. You are a supersensor operating in 8,000 resolution while everyone else is watching a grainy VHS tape. Your brain isn't cluttered because you're getting older. It's cluttered because you possess the rare ability to see connections that others miss. You are an integrator, a polymath in a world of specialists. And your primary struggle isn't learning, it's the brutal, biological process of unlearning the standard issue. Manual society forced upon you to understand why your brain feels like a chaotic browser with 100 tabs open. We have to look at the actual hardware tucked inside your skull. In neuroscience, we talk about a phenomenon called latent inhibition. Most people have a very efficient, very aggressive spam filter in their brain. Their hardware automatically deletes 90% of the background noise, the hum of the refrigerator, the pattern on the wallpaper, the subtle shift in a stranger's tone of voice, so they can focus on one singular, boring task. But your brain, your internal secretary, is on a permanent strike. You possess what we call low latent inhibition. Every single piece of sensory data, every flicker of light, every subtext in a conversation, every obscure connection between a tree root and a software algorithm gets sent straight to your primary inbox with an urgent flag attached. This is why a trip to the grocery store feels like running a marathon. But it's also exactly why you see the world-altering details in creative breakthroughs that everyone else is literally blind to. This sensory flood is compounded by your default mode network, or the DMN. In a normal brain, the DMN is a quiet background hum that only kicks in during daydreaming. In you, the DMN is a high-definition IMAX theater that never stops playing. This is the region where your sense of self and your most groundbreaking ideas are formed. But because you process so much data, your DMN is constantly trying to connect the dots in 1,000 directions at once. You aren't distracted. You are hyper-focused on the entire universe simultaneously. And this brings us to the real truth about the aging brain. Aging isn't just about losing cells. It's about the accumulation of neural interference. Your brain is essentially a massive library of complex scripts, and for a multitasker, those scripts are overlapping. The difficulty you feel in switching tasks isn't a sign of decay, it's a sign of a high-complexity system trying to manage an overwhelming amount of cross-pollinated data. The real challenge for the 21st century polymath is neuroplasticity. We love the idea that the brain is plastic and can always learn. But we forget the darker side. Neuroplasticity is a use-it-or-lose-it system that creates deep, myelinated grooves in our thinking. By the time we hit our 30s and 40s, we aren't just learning new things. We are fighting the ghosts of old habits that have been reinforced for decades. This is why dopamine detoxing usually fails you. You try to go into monk mode by locking your phone in a box and staring at a wall for 24 hours. But your amygdala, the brain's ancient, grumpy smoke detector, signals a red alert. It thinks the world has run out of resources, and the moment your detox is over, you binge watch 6 hours of trash to compensate. You haven't reset your brain. You've just made it more desperate. We need a shift from stimulus avoidance to neuroautonomy, the ability to navigate the flood without drowning. But before we can install that new software, we have to address the brutal shadow side of this trait, the part no one in the self-help world wants to talk about. This high-fidelity tax isn't just a metaphor for a bad day. It is the brutal, physiological reality of an engine that has no idle setting. When you are a supersensor, the world doesn't just happen to you, it collides with you. Because you lack that standard-issue spam filter, you are perpetually operating in a state of high alert, which leads to a specific kind of profound existential loneliness. You look at others who seem to navigate the world with such ease. People who can sit in a loud office, eat processed food, and check off a linear to-do list without their soul leaving their body. And you feel like an alien masquerading as a human. You begin to ruminate, and that IMAX theater in your head starts playing a horror movie called Everyone Else Has It Figured Out. This is the moment where the Ferrari engine starts melting the bicycle frame. You experience anhedonia, that gray, hollow numbness where even your brilliant ideas feel like heavy burdens, and you retreat into the ultimate self-sabotage, the safe crouch. You stop trying to succeed because success feels like it will only bring more noise, more expectations, and more sensory data that you simply don't have the RAM to process. You choose the comfort of a small failure over the terrifying exposure of a large victory. And here is the crushing irony. You have been punishing yourself for a trait that is the only reason the human race survived long enough to invent the very society that's now calling you too sensitive. We zoom out from your personal struggle to the grand scale of human history. We see that your brain type wasn't an evolutionary accident. It was a biological necessity. In the ancient tribe, the normal brains were great for the day-to-day grind, the gathering, the repetitive tasks, the social cohesion. But the tribe needed a supersensor. They needed the person who could notice the one blade of grass moving against the wind, signaling a predator. They needed the deep thinker who could look at the migration patterns of birds and the subtle changes in the soil to predict a drought. You are the descendant of the early warning system. You are the advisor who sees the 3-year consequence of a 3-minute decision. Modern industrialized society is built for the masses, but the masses have always relied on people like you to navigate the wicked. Environments where the rules change and the stakes are high. You aren't unfocused. You are the sentinel. So how do we stop the sentinel from burning the fort down just to feel some peace? How do we move from being a victim of our hardware to being the architect of a self-sustaining system? We need to install the Metamorphosis System, 3-step biological intervention. It's designed to rig the game in your favor. The first step is what I call the greenhouse strategy for protecting your hardware. You must realize that your Ferrari engine requires a high-octane environment. If you are trying to work in a space with fluorescent lights, constant interruptions, and visual clutter, your prefrontal cortex is wasting 80% of its glucose just trying to not look at the mess. You need to curate a sensory vacuum. This involves using noise-canceling technology, controlling your lighting, implementing a zero-input buffer for the first 90 minutes of your day. You are not cleaning your room. You are deactivating the amygdala's smoke detector so the CEO can finally do some strategic work. The second step is the acceptance filter, or the software update. The multitasker's greatest source of self-sabotage is the inability to say no to a new spark of curiosity. Because your brain is a far transfer machine, you see the potential in everything, which leads to decision entropy. To fix this, you need to implement a rigid gatekeeper. You must stop making decisions based on interest and start making them based on legs. In our M-shaped thinker model, you only allow yourself 2 or 3 pillars of mastery at a time. Every other brilliant idea, the urban beekeeping, the 14th century glass blowing goes into a cold storage notebook. You aren't killing your curiosity. You are placing it in a waiting room. This allows you to say no without the crushing weight of FOMO. because you've given your brain a biological guarantee that the idea is safe, but it is not allowed to harvest your current RAM. Finally, we have to address the true reset. Most people think rest is a passive activity, like doom scrolling on TikTok or binge watching a series. But for your brain, that is not rest. That is just a different kind of high-fructose sensory overload, because your DMN is already hyperactive. Passive consumption just gives it more attention residue to ruminate on. True recovery for a supersensor must be low input and high fidelity. It looks like staring at a tree, walking in silence, or engaging in a repetitive tactile task, like woodworking or knitting that moves the processing from the prefrontal cortex to the basal ganglia. You need to perform a neurological defragmentation, where you allow the dots to connect themselves without your conscious ego trying to force the outcome. The self-blame ends today. You were never meant to be a standardized part in a linear machine. You were never meant to be a normal person who is slightly broken. You were meant to be the person who weaves the complex threads of our world into a coherent tapestry. You are the elite integrator, the bridge builder, and the supersensor. When you stop surviving your environment and start engineering it, when you stop trying to willpower your way through a biological strike and start honoring the fuel your system actually needs, self-sabotage evaporates. You move from the dash-shaped life of shallow panic to the M-shaped career of profound impact. You were never broken. You are just a biological masterpiece waiting for the right operating manual to help you build that first step. I've created a free guide called the Sentinels Audit. It is a minimalist framework designed to help you identify your specific sensory triggers and map out your first greenhouse environment in under 15 minutes. You can download it at the link below. I want to hear from you in the comments. What is the most ridiculous thing that has triggered your self-sabotage this week? Let's dismantle those simulations together. And if you are ready to see how this reclaimed focus allows you to master the most wicked career environments of the future, you need to watch our next video on the polymath strategy, where we take this quiet mind and turn it into a high-output engine. Reclaim your sovereignty. Build the bridge. You are watching Cognitive Blueprint.